Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new session of NTalks second edition. Today, we will address highlights relevant topic, cargo owner empowerment and hinterland visibility, a key issue in the modern logistics, where data control and standardization are shaping new ways of organizing the supply chains. It is a privilege to have with us today Jaco Voorspuij, a leading expert in logistical data standards and smart supply chains. Jaco is a senior consultant at Fixed Law Consulting and has worked with global organizations promoting solutions for data interoperability, efficiency, and traceability in the complex logistics networks. Hello, Jaco. Great to have you with us today. And thank you again for joining this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all actually for being here for this webinar this evening. So yeah, I am an expert in data standards to be used in supply chains and transport and logistics, 35 years of experience, including with transport service providers, manufacturers, traders, and a whole range of different other stakeholders. As mentioned, I own Fixed Law Consulting, and I'm also a partner in Smart Logistics Partnership or SLP Alliance. Just a few quick words around SLP. So we are a partnership of experts and organizations across all of Europe. We focus on improving the performance of transport and logistics by eliminating waste in transport and logistics operations. We focus on the goods movement process, so the movement of goods from a seller to a buyer. And in the process of creating these improvements and eliminating waste, we leverage proven global standards, both digital and physical. But the presentation today will focus largely on digital and a little bit on physical aspects. So,
thank you.
Can you hear me?
I was saying the floor is yours. We are looking forward to your insights on how cargo owners can take more control over the transportation. So I think you can start your projection.
Oh, I thought I was doing that, but apparently I had forgotten to start sharing my screen, or I have lost the share of my screen. Apologies for that.
No problem, we wait.
So let me just go back one slide then. I hope I am sharing now.
Yeah, you are sharing now.
I'll skip the slide from SLP Alliance. I'll go straight here. So there are well-known issues with transportation. Just for completeness, I want to quickly go over a few of the main ones. So cargo owners generally don't know where goods are, at least not in a timely fashion, meaning that sometimes they get the information well after delivery. In case of disruptions in execution, there is little or no flexibility to deal with those disruptions. So there's little or no resilience in transport and logistics today. There is increasing regulatory requirements, and the information that's needed to comply is not reaching the cargo owners. And then there is a lot of wasteful sub-optimization in transport and logistics networks, also because of the way the transport service providers try to keep everything in their own networks, even if that makes no sense from an end-to-end optimization perspective, which also leads to a suboptimal or poor customer experience when it comes to delivery of goods from a seller to a buyer. an example that we all know, we probably have experienced more than once that we get multiple couriers at our door on one day. So because we happened to purchase from different marketplaces. I'm not going to go into this a lot, but one of the key reasons that we want to avoid this kind of a scenario where those 3 vans from the 3 main courier services are just parked one after the other to deliver parcels to the same place. We need to make sure that receivers get much more control over the timings of deliveries, and also whether or not 3 carriers deliver or just 1, because this madness causes a lot of underutilization of vans, drivers' times, and other resources of carriers, but it also very much increases the pollution in the urban area, specifically with air, noise, and other things. And this also increases the numbers of frustrated city inhabitants quite significantly. You might think that we could ignore the last mile, but from a beneficial cargo owner perspective, it is very important to realize that up to 50% of the transport costs incurred in total are actually incurred in the last mile, and that's largely due to the wasteful practices in this particular last mile context in the end-to-end goods movement process. Talk about that a little bit more further down the line. Just a visualization of the issue, also from a bit of a physical perspective. On the right-hand side, you see loads and loads of different labels, and this is a small subset of all the labels I've seen over time. And one of the key things to take away from this is that senders generally do not assign a globally unique transport ID. So they also do not record which goods they put into which boxes. And that creates a whole range of different problems that I'll be discussing in a while. The transport service providers, they do, or at least many of them do, assign transport unit IDs, but they exist only for the part of the transport execution that this carrier is responsible for. And usually the next carrier can't do anything with the label of a previous carrier. So this continues to be repeated as many times as there are carriers in the network between the seller and the buyer. And pretty much all of them insist on proprietary information exchanges between the senders and the various carriers, which causes endless confusion in transport and logistics. And recently, I've already mentioned in other contexts that the cost of confusion is probably the biggest cost of all in transport and logistics, although it is probably the most overlooked cost in supply chains as well. So to avoid that waste, senders must also adapt their own processes to manage the transportation execution well, or at least a lot better than is currently the case. And they can do this actually quite easily because all standards, or at least a few standards listed here, already help very much in addressing these confusion issues. So there is quite a long-standing standard from ISO, probably 25, 30 years old by now, if not a bit older. And it can already be assigned by the sender at the moment that they create this transport unit, be it a parcel or be it a pallet or whatever it is that carries the goods. It is also widely supported, as you can see, GS1 as UPU and also DHL Express, for instance, they support and or use as default this particular standard so that the transport units in principle are transferable across any and all who handle this parcel or this transport unit on its journey from seller to buyer. Now that's one element. You've got the number, but those numbers are generally not easy to understand or type in. So you also need standards for barcodes, so people can automatically scan it without fail, and the number may be used to then find information associated with that number and therefore associated with that transport unit. That's also a very old standard. More recently, QR codes have come into play, and that's both a technical standard in the way that it is constructed in little blocks, but there is also standards for the content, so the information that's encoded into the QR codes that have been around for a while and that we may use in this context to improve the performance of transport and logistics. And the content standard is this one, is a GS1 scan for transport. And it ultimately links the transport unit to its information online. So in principle, one could say that that standard enables a digital twin, a real-time digital twin of a transport unit and the data in the cloud. So let us continue then. So this is and this has a build, but I'm just going to quickly go through. So there will be a label with 2 barcodes, one a linear one to support those that are currently working with that and are not yet able to work with this QR code. That's on here as well. And everyone in this supply chain or this goods movement process, they should all be able to use this label and the data that's on this label as both that's available visibly as well as what can be found based on the QR codes and the linear barcode and the identifiers and data that's enclosed in them. As you can see, this is a pretty comprehensive set of different kinds of parties that may get involved. We'll be looking at this further down the line from different perspectives and different areas in the transport and logistics networks. So I would like to start with the 3M case. It's a case study. It's a case study that started about 15 years ago or so. It's a case study mostly focused on a road transport and logistics network, moving cargo or customer orders basically from a range of different shipping locations in the European region, 50 of them, using 7 distribution centers and a network of cross-dock hubs to move that cargo from factories all the way to the receiver. The production cycles were relatively long, 2 weeks for production to stock, but more importantly, non-stock products that were made to order, there was more than 4 weeks lead time on those. The cause was that from any location in Europe, the factories were trying to create full container loads to every other destination across Europe. And it took usually quite a long time to fill those trailers up. And that made short order lead times for delivery to their customers, well, basically impossible. It also caused high levels of product inventory. And more importantly, non-stock portfolio options, they couldn't even be sold all over Europe. Actually, it could be sold only to a few regions within Europe, basically limiting the sales force in generating revenue across Europe. Now, clearly, what you see here, most of this is core business oriented when you look at manufacturers and beneficial cargo owners. Very little, if anything, you see here really has to do with direct issues with transport and logistics as such. And yet, these drivers, pure core business drivers led 3M to adopt a, well, quite revolutionary and at least a very innovative approach at that time to their logistics to solve these core business issues. So what they did is they wanted to create a steady flow of product away from those manufacturing sites, but also throughout that network to their customers. And they started with just making sure that they could move away the product from the plants to the distribution centers on a daily basis. All products were included in the planning cycle. Before I go into further details about the hub and spoke network that their transport and logistics network is, the main objective of the whole setup was to make sure that the customer deliveries that used to be built at the plant would no longer be built in the plant, but they would be delivered in local hubs as close as possible to the customer, where they would combine and mix transport units along the journey as needed. And it's very important to note here that any of those transport units could come from any location in this 3M network, and they would be combined in a single delivery to the customer. So if something came from France and another thing came from Germany and they both went to the same customer in Sweden, in the hub in Sweden, they would be combined and delivered as one delivery, even though that might be deliveries associated with more than one customer order. So here's a view of some of the main points in the European network, just to illustrate that this is truly a pan-European network. It's been rolled out since then to the entire European network, and is also being rolled out now in the Americas. So since this has been running 15 years, I think we can safely say that 3M feels that this approach is very successful, also because they've now invested 15 years in implementing it throughout their network worldwide. So what have they achieved as a result then? That we will get to in a minute, but this is the way they started to change their network to achieve those benefits. And it is a very simple rule, basically, that they have adopted. So every single transport unit is uniquely identified at source, and at source it is associated with the important information that's associated with that particular transport unit, such as order numbers and other elements that are required in the transport and logistics network. I will have more details on how that works exactly in a while, but the key rule: identify every transport unit uniquely and make sure that all the relevant data is captured at source, that is to say, at the source where the transport unit is created. And then they wanted to make sure that all of these transport units, no matter where they are in this journey from the seller's plant or the seller's distribution center towards the customer, the buyer, that all of these transport units can be managed through consolidation, so putting any number of transport units together to optimize utilization, splitting them off again in a next network hub, and then recombining them on a next leg towards the next network hub. And that needs to be able to be done efficiently and effectively in all of these network hubs along the way. And the transport unit ID and the associated information are the key things enabling this flexible management of all of these transport units through the network. we have to be honest, not every carrier was immediately able to do this. So the standards that we are describing further down will not always be possible to be used, and they definitely were not always possible to be used in a 3M context, because some of their carriers could not work with that at the time, and some of them may not be able to work with those at the moment still. But that's just, let's say, a lesson from practice. Standards are great, but people need to be able to use them before they can really deliver the full benefits of implementing standards. Right. One of the things that I would also like to note is that they implemented a harmonized process in each of those cross-dock hubs or network hubs or nodes, or whatever you want to call it. And that was all driven by this unit ID and the data associated by the unit ID. And one of the key things that it enabled was making sure that you did not need to create delivery paperwork already at source. You could actually postpone the delivery paperwork, delivery notes, until you were in the hub as close as possible to that customer, which meant that the delivery documentation was far more reliable than it was before. Again, that was a business benefit, not so much a transport and logistics benefit that they were after. So I mentioned that we would have a little bit of a look at how this hub and spoke network worked. It has basically 3 layers. So the hub, the manufacturing plants would move their goods on a regular basis to a few quote unquote European consolidation hubs. So this is where they consolidated stock and also make to order to the extent possible. And then from those central locations, they could move it to more regional consolidation hubs through the legs in the network, and then from the regional hubs they could go very close to the local customers to do that final recombination and creating the final delivery to the customer here at the end. So you can see that there is a layered approach where we have very potentially quite small local hubs, larger ones regionally, and then the largest ones really, basically the backbone consolidation hubs near to the factories. So that's quite important to note. Each step of the way, you have boxes being managed, put into trucks, mixed, taken off the truck, taken apart, that is, transport units become individual transport units again, recombined to again pretty much full load trucks, and then they are broken down again, split at the local hub, and then recombined for final mile delivery for the customer. That's important to note. Why does that actually matter when you look at the original pain points that 3M identified? So what this enabled is that production cycles could really be shortened. Because of the frequent shipments away from the factory, the production planning could actually be done with much smaller quantities. So you could basically make sure that any kind of product was produced within a week's time, or probably even within a day. So that also meant that if people ordered non-stock items, the lead times for such non-stock items was reduced very significantly. It also meant that the entire portfolio of products, including those non-stock items, could now be sold across the entire EMEA region, basically increasing the revenue streams for 3M So again, this is a business problem solved because we solved a logistics issue. Lower inventory levels was also a direct result. If you can create smaller production batches and you can ship more frequency, your overall average inventory is going to drop quite significantly. So again, transport and logistics impacting very significantly on supply chain key performance indicators, not the least of which is because of the shorter lead times, because of the far more reliable, predictable lead times, the customer experience for orders placed with 3M has also significantly increased. And this is here a clear direct benefit from this approach for transport and logistics. So in this network, the utilization rate of the trucks, especially the long-haul trucks, moved from something around 30 or even below 30 to well over 70%, basically meaning that they took off more than half of the trucks they had running around before the implementation of this transport and logistics innovation. So what also, again, is a logistics impact. So they were far more flexible now in acquiring delivery services locally, that is movements from the local hubs to local customers than they were before when they had this network with long distance movements only, where there is fewer transport service providers available. The net result at the time when this was measured, and this is a while back, they were saving some 5 million truck kilometers per annum. And although they are not clear exactly about the millions of euros saved per year as a result of this new way of doing their transport and logistics networks from the production plants all the way to the buyers, is several millions per year. And as far as I've been told or heard, this may exceed more than 10 million euro per annum. So quite a large number, not to be frowned upon, but I would imagine that those business benefits are quite a lot more than those millions of euros. But they never disclosed any indication of those numbers. So the 3M case study for a road-based transport and logistics case study. So transport and logistics and the harmonizations of the processes and the use of standards has delivered highly valuable advantages also in manufacturing and sales environments of that organization. I could probably say that it could say primarily in those areas of the organization and not just in transport and logistics. The standards enabled to increase the connectivity between 3M and their network of different transport service providers, the flexibility of using the correct transport service providers wherever they would take cargo from 3M over any distance. And if there was a disruption somewhere in the network, it would be much easier for 3M to actually take action because the box would be uniquely identified. You would always have access to the information about that particular box, where it was supposed to go to. And because of the standardized processes in all of the network hubs, you could easily reroute via different hubs in the network to get to the ultimate destination. Another thing, because everything is also scannable and scanned and uniquely identified, in this network, everything is actually scanned. So that delivers a vast amount of information, of data that can be turned into information almost in real time, meaning that you have a much better situational awareness that would create this flexibility and resilience, but also you can do some more sophisticated analytics across the data sets to identify patterns that may help you improve the overall process, not just a single journey, but the overall process or part of the process in part of the network. So that is an additional benefit. It's not quantified, but probably very important in today's age of digitalization. This approach of having every box identified and barcoded in a standardized way enabled various levels of automation in various hubs, also depending on the traffic in those hubs. And it is all due to the fact that all items are identifiable, meaning that we could consolidate all items to the maximum amount possible. And that consolidation is basically the key driver for the transport and logistics savings that we have mentioned. Now, that is a road network. I know that this is not necessarily the full network that's associated with deliveries. So let's take a look at deliveries in the city. I mentioned in the beginning that half of the cost for logistics from the cargo owner's perspective occurs in urban logistics, the last mile. So at the moment, everybody goes into that city and goes out of the city on their own. That is a very wasteful way of doing things, as I mentioned before. So there are different ways of doing things that are sort of emerging, but not yet widely used, unfortunately. And that is this concept of city hubs or urban consolidation centers. So basically you have multiple shippers, cargo owners, sending their goods, all of their deliveries that need to go to receivers that you see on the right-hand side within a particular city or city area. They may still use their own carriers to take those individual transport units as consolidated pallets to the city hub. In the city hub, they would then recombine all of those individual transport units, regardless of which shipper they came from, based on the receiver location. So basically, receiver 1, you see here on the right-hand side, may get shipments delivered from shipper 1 and shipper 3, receiver 2 from shipper 1 and shipper 2, and receiver 3 potentially from all 3. The city hub consolidates all of those transport units and then delivers that in one go to the receiver. That solves this issue of 3 deliveries where you only need 1 on that day. What it also achieves is that this receiver and any of those receivers may have made arrangement with this city hub, as to when those receipts would be welcome, because that's clearly something you can hardly arrange with 3 carriers over the day. So that is, especially if you're a small shop, you may wish to receive them a certain period of the day when you have people available and you are not too busy with your customers. That's when you want your stuff delivered. So that is enabled by those 2 things. Consolidation of delivery, timing of delivery is exactly the main benefits that the city hub delivers, mainly for the receivers in the city. But as a result of this consolidation, there's also, in principle, less transport cost that would be incurred by the shippers that would otherwise have to take care of those movements inside the city for their own costs with their own carrier. So that's another thing that is improved as a result. So this approach, as you may have already concluded now, if we have unique transport unit identifiers and we have information associated with those transport unit identifiers exchanged with that city hub in advance of these units arriving, they can easily confirm that they have received those things from each of those cargo owners, and they can also easily plan the delivery cycle, record delivery, and feed all of that information back to the cargo owner. So again, this is back to that original vision, and the building is apparently slightly different from the previous one. I don't know why. If all of those senders would have a label that looked a little bit like this one, they would have a standardized linear barcode as well as a standardized 2D barcode on this. Really, we could also use this for the transport from the seller to this UCC/City Hub. City Hub manages everything in its own hub based on that information and the barcodes. No need to relabel. They then hand it over to the delivery people, and the delivery people deliver that to pickup points. They deliver it to homes. They may deliver it to shops, retailers, whatever. And again, all of that based on a single label that may be used from the seller all the way to the buyer, using completely standardized identifiers and barcodes containing information about the transport units. So why am I saying that? Is because that QR code is actually able to hold quite a lot of information beyond a simple but very important unique transport unit identifier. So on the left-hand side, you see information about the, I'm trying to get the pointer there here. So this is a box that needs to go to GS1 Sweden, a person in GS1 Sweden, the address, postal code, and a phone number. So that's what we can easily read. But you can also put that quite easily in a completely standardized way, according to the GS1 Scan for Transport standard. You see S4T at the end. That's the indicator that it is a Scan for Transport standard. And it has exact same information, but I would still like to highlight two main things. So we have this thing here. Oh, sorry, I should not have clicked. So this part here indicates that this is a unique identifier called the GS1 Serial Shipping Container Code, or SSCC, globally unique. And this is the value for that transport unit identifier. Now, you can see that that is a very long number, so you really want to make sure that that number is easily scanned in systems. So with the QR code, that's possible. So if you just look then at this number, you can go into your own database and you can find information about that number, more than maybe on this box. Fine. But what if you don't have access to a remote system? There are more than half of the world's surface, that is the world's land surface, doesn't actually have a reliable or affordable connection to host systems. There is no internet there, basically. So then this additional information can be used to still handle that particular box and make sure it gets to the right place at the right time. Okay, that's nice. We have the data on the box. So it also means that in principle, we can read that information into our own systems if we do have connection to the systems. So you wouldn't need EDI if you have that information on the box. All nice. So that is interesting for the logistics service provider, that they can get good information, reliable information with one scan into their systems rather than having to type all of that stuff. But maybe more importantly, from a cargo owner's perspective, they also are able to put in this so-called URL. And that URL may point to an application that they actually run on the web. And that would mean that anybody that scans the QR code is able to connect with this cargo owner and, for instance, confirm that they have received this particular transport unit. So even a consumer, the receiver here, could scan this. They could go to the cargo owner's website. They could say, yes, I've received it. And for instance, also say, and yes, I now want to invoke my warranty for having received this product. So this opens up a whole new range of possibilities for both the receiver, the consumer, as well as the seller of this product. All enabled by an innovation in transport and logistics. One thing I do still need to highlight from what does it solve, because everything is based on standards, it's completely standardized. So in principle, no matter who or which party reads this particular barcode, the QR code that is, they would understand this correctly if they just know how to interpret the standard correctly. And the original creator of the barcode also created it completely according to the standard. Because this is completely standardized, it would also be much easier for senders, cargo owners to work with cities, because they can basically put that barcode on it, put the label on it, and in principle, the city hubs can already work with them. Because that helps a lot, because if you have hundreds or not thousands of cities across the European region where potentially there would be this need for urban consolidation centers, in principle, the senders no longer need to create hundreds or thousands of EDIs. They could just use the QR codes, the completely standardized QR codes, to achieve the minimum exchange of information to ensure accurate delivery of their transport units within the city limits served by the city hub. So I know that a lot of people on the call are also very much into maritime-based transport, so I will go through this fairly quickly because it is beginning to sound like repeats of what I've just told you before. But these are the main things I would like to just discuss. So shipment and consignments are terms that confuse us no end in supply chains. I'm going to provide some semantic anchors, going to run through a basic example, and then the final question is, what about visibility, which is one of the main things that is in the title of the presentation. So basically on the left-hand side, you see an image that is probably 25, 30 years old already, created by UNCFACT. But the key thing is that there are two views here. One is a trade-related view that you see across the top, and that's all around sales orders and shipments. And the other view of the world is the transport view, where people generally are talking about consignments. So the shipment is based on a contract between the seller and the buyer, and it concerns trade items and trade packaging. Whereas the consignment is really the transport contract between the transport buyer and a transport seller, and it concerns consignment items and transport packaging or transport units, and they move from consignor to consignee. And those words, consignor and consignee, may refer to the same party as seller and buyer, but only under very strict conditions where there is an end-to-end consignment agreed between the seller, for instance, and the transport service provider. So here are some main characteristics. I'm not going to go through all. I've highlighted a few because they're important for our context. And again, this is based on UNC fact slides. So the shipment is a collection of trade items that have been packaged for transportation. Key important. It may form part or all of a consignment. So basically meaning you may consolidate 3 shipments into a consignment. I'll show you that in a second. The transport contract or consignment is a collection of consignment items or transport units that need to move from a consignor to a consignee. And a consignment can be made up of 1 or more shipments. And in principle, although not listed here, a consignment can also be a part of a shipment. For instance, if you need to move 5 intermodal containers and some of the transport needs to be on the back of a truck, you would need 5 truck movements to move those 5 containers for that 1 shipment. So you see 1 shipment being split in that example over 5 consignments. So here's more of a visualization then, what that would look like in a fairly typical maritime-based seller to buyer goods movement process. So the shipment is this trade transaction between seller and buyer. So that runs end to end. It's the green color. This seller has decided that they will manage the transport to the buyer, and they decided that they will they will use 3 different carriers for 3 different parts of the end-to-end carriage. I'm using the ICC terminology. We have pre-carriage with 1 carrier from the seller's location to the port of loading. We have a main maritime carriage transport service provider that the seller contracted to move this from the port of loading to the port of discharge. And then at the back end, the onward carriage, they've engaged with yet another carrier, creating a 3rd consignment to take the goods from the port of discharge to the buyer. All fine and good. So 1 shipment, 3 consignments. But we also have this concept of subcontracting in transport and logistics. So in this case, the main maritime service provider, they decided, actually, I'm going to subcontract the entire movement to 2 different carriers. And there's then a transshipment point in the middle. So the first one gets an order from me as a transport service provider to move the cargo I got from the seller from port of loading to the transshipment point. And then the second carrier that I subcontracted gets the cargo or gets to transport the cargo from the transshipment point to the port of discharge. And that little thing can continue a few times deeper, but the key thing is we have this kind of nesting supported also conceptually. Shipment always end to end, consignment run from a point in the network to another point in the network associated with a specific carrier. And then the whole thing can also go down. Visualizing it a little bit more and then linking it also to the question, where are my goods? Because that was one of the key things we mentioned at the beginning. It is a main question that cargo owners will always ask. Well, this can also be quite straightforward. Trade items, those are the goods that they are concerned with. They pack them during pick, pack, and dispatch in transport units that they identify with SCCC codes, a globally unique identifier, as we mentioned before. And then these will be associated with a shipment. And as we already heard, a shipment is generally associated with a sales order. So you see this hierarchy building. You can have one trade item in one box, or you can consolidate multiple trade items in one box. And also you can have multiple boxes associated with a shipment or one box associated with a shipment. And then it may also well be that when this gets shipped, for instance, from the seller's warehouse as a consolidation to the port of loading, it could be one big consignment containing all of those shipments that they need to send to that port of loading in one consignment. So conceptually, this is what happens. And it's actually not that difficult if you look at these things from this kind of visual perspective. Everything you see in this slide is completely based on standards, identification standards, ways of working that have already been developed for decades by GS1 and UNCFACT and also ISO. So nothing new under the sun, just an explanation of how it can all be done based on global data standards. Visualizing a normal invoice, you can see your trade items on the left. You can see the sales order number, whatever the number may be, top left. You associate that with your GSIN number. This is the data that gets connected. So you have global standard identifiers in those red boxes. And then you've also got all of these, let's say, proprietary identifiers, such as the sales orders. And they can easily be linked to the global identifiers, no problem. So we don't need to boil the ocean. We can just start to use the identifiers, the global unique identifiers, in addition to what has already been used and that what people are familiar with. Here we see a similar kind of thing. So now we know that this GSIN exists. We have seen which boxes are associated with it. And in this diagram, we see exactly which trade items are in which box. So in this case, GTIN 123 and 321 are both in SSCC 1, combined with GTIN 312. And then we have SSCC 2, where we only have GTIN 213 in the box. Nor the ship from and ship deliver to for now, but you can also use globally unique identifiers for those. This is a slide that we could talk about for a long time over, but I'm not going to do this. The key thing is that we see a range of different parties at the bottom here. All of these parties are able to read the SSCC on the box. And because the SSCC is linked to these other identifiers, you can then go back to any other important document or entity to find more information. So from SCCC, you can go to sales transactions, you can go to shipments, you can go to consignments. Sale transaction can get you to the product information. That may hold information that could be used and must be used in customs declarations, and so on and so forth. In conclusion, this slide basically illustrates that based on that one single identifier that's on the outside of the transport unit, you can find any information for any purpose, for any party in this end-to-end movement of the transport and logistics unit from the seller to the buyer. Now, that's also what this says. So I'm not going to go into this a lot more than what I just did. The one thing I do need to stress, in this slide, it may not be obvious, but the shipment ID is always the same end to end. The transport unit ID that's associated with that shipment ID is also the same throughout the journey from seller to buyer. But there is a bit of a snag. So what if you start consolidating units? So then this transport unit is no longer visible from the outside. Again, standards and standard descriptions also for UNCFACT. For instance, the integrated track and trace for multimodal transport, they describe how that works. And basically what happens is, like we do in these recombination of transport units in the hubs for 3M, You have a number of transport units to start from. That's the dark blue in the middle. And then you start recombining those into new transport units. Clearly, these transport units are associated with different shipments. And in this slide, it should be obvious that number 32 is actually a combination of units associated with different shipments. So shipments get commingled in the end-to-end journey across the network in 3M. And this is basically also what happens in many other supply chains where consolidation takes place. Each time you consolidate, you may also associate the globally unique identifiers according to ISO and GS1 with any kind of transport document identifiers, such as bills of ladings, CMR, or whatever. You can also consolidate consignments, similar kind of challenge, but this is really the freight forwarder scenario. Again, you have transport units to start with. You recombine them into larger transport units. The only thing to stress on this slide is that a transport unit may also be transport equipment, like an intermodal container. And for instance, in that case, the SSCC would be the identifier for that particular journey with that particular cargo inside, whereas the big code is a lifelong identifier that exists over many different movements of that container, but you can still associate that container ID with the transport unit ID, and then you can track them both. Loading on ships, very similar kind of scenario. Again, you record, and this is what I want to say here, at every step you record the links between old and new transport units or transport equipment or even transport means. Because you record all of these, let's say, links at every step of the way, whenever you have an SSCC, you can always go back to any of the previous events where those links have been recorded. And drilling down, you will be able to also always go back to the SSCCs that are associated with the shipment as we identified before, that we can then link that shipment to any and all sales and purchase order information that is relevant for specific parties in this goods movement process from seller to buyer. The way that this can easily be achieved, for instance, is using the standards EPCIS and the associated core business vocabulary, both of which are ISO standards, so 19987 and 19988. They are maintained by GS1, but I don't want to go into the details of exactly how that works here. I wanted to keep this slightly more conceptual, so that it applies to any kind of exchanges that achieve the same kind of consistency and also achieve that you have this common shared ledger that all parties may use to access information about transport units and any history associated with those transport units, ultimately relating to the sales order and the purchase order that are the cargo being transported. So, in conclusion, cargo owners who want to be able to manage and track all of their goods flows, regardless of the modes of transport involved, regardless of the distances over which individual transport units are carried, they can do so based on standards that have been around for a long time and have been proven already at scale in many different places in the world. So the main conclusion is cargo owners can, and in my view, must take control of their transportation networks using those standards, so they may achieve similar kinds of benefits as those that I've highlighted for the 3M road transport network. And I think we can all agree that those are very substantial benefits, not just in TNL, but I would say primarily even in the core businesses of those cargo owners. And that's me done. So if you want to read a bit more about these kinds of things, you can go to this ICC paper that I wrote, and you can also go to the different standards from UNCFAC, like this integrated track and trace. And I see I've not included that here, which I should have. So that concludes my presentation. It took me pretty much an hour.
In time, yeah.
So not so bad.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Jaco. This is an excellent and insightful presentation. You brought forward not only the challenge, but also the very practical solution, especially with the role of global standards and the global case of the 3M. And thank you again for sharing your knowledge with us. It was great, fantastic.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. So let's now open the floor for questions and comments. You are all welcome to write in the chats. Let's take this opportunity to ask questions or clarify any doubts you may have in this presentation.
I'm happy to clarify anything that may not be 100%.
Perhaps I'm gonna start already.
I see something in the chat, but let me see if I can open that up.
Let me see. Okay. This is from João Moreira. He said, thank you, Jaco. You said that most of the solutions already exist. So what's as failed? How might lose out with this synchronization and could be preventing these solutions, or is not it essentially a lack of coordination and integration between the various stakeholders, the different stakeholders?
Well, the solutions exist, that is, all the standards exist, but the solution is also that the IT systems that are being used by the various state parties must also be able to do this. And so there are two. If we took this most basic rule to apply a globally unique identifier to the transport unit, and also as a business requirement, capture the information whenever that's associated with a transport unit, whenever you create a transport unit, anywhere in that journey from the seller to the final delivery to the buyer. Now, if you remember this 3M network, then it already starts at the factory. So this is one of the key things where the cargo owners really need to change the way that they work. At the moment, most of them throw these boxes more or less on a pallet and then move them out to a DC. That's, with the given regulations and traceability and that kind of stuff, is no longer really possible. And so they would have to change the way they work to capture the transport unit, capture all of the associated information with it. Then it goes on to the first carrier. They would then also be able to need to be able to take that information about the transport unit and this globally unique consignment identifier into their systems, because they need to feed back to the shipper based on those globally unique identifiers. That's the whole thing. Then it moves to the next hub. again, the next hub must be able to work with those globally unique transport identifiers. They probably need to adjust the way they work because they were probably just sorting things visually based on text on the labels. Now, all of a sudden, they're supposed to start scanning information. So all I'm saying here is that the standards, they exist, but the ways of working need to be adjusted in those various locations. So in that sense, the coordination and the integration of those business processes and the associated systems is probably the main challenge to overcome in these transport and logistics networks. Do people lose out? Well, some may, but I think in the end, everyone would still benefit from this opportunity to exchange these transport units far more easily than is currently the case. I mean, I work also a lot with postal service providers and couriers, and it's as simple as this. If your first time delivery fails, you lose money on that transport contract. It's as simple as that. So if you are able to work far more efficiently and far more reliably based on global standards, that would help your profitability ultimately. Because I'm convinced that your first time delivery success would improve quite a bit as a result of the application of these kinds of standards and being able to use things like city hubs, etc., as a result of using those standards and changing the way you organize the transportation. So it's a very interesting question, João. Technically speaking, nothing should be really in the way, but I think most cargo owners and probably also all the other parties involved, they are very, well, concerned or scared or whatever the word is you want to use to change what they're doing now. That is really, I think, the main obstacle. I will say 3M didn't really care so much about the other parties in this network. They just basically pushed it through. They were able to push it through their own organization that they needed to change the way they worked. And as a result, they wanted to have all of these benefits. So they put a lot of pressure on all of those parties that they pay in the transport and logistics networks to the extent possible that they would also use those global standards for identification and labeling, and implement that standardized process in the hubs such that you have that reliability and flexibility that is necessary to move these consolidated mixed transport units without error through those networks to the buyers. So this is why I'm saying that cargo owners must take control, because if they don't, there is little chance, I think very little chance, that those networks that they rely on, and in the case of 3M, it was more than a dozen different logistics service providers involved, that network would have done it on its own. You need to have somebody pushing this through that network.
To start, this is a kind of collaboration with the stakeholders. But you believe we can push this more if we have something like a regulation or imposing regulation for EU for this kind of issue?
I think the European Union would be reluctant to impose this because it would basically well, so far I've not seen EU regulations pushing a specific standard identification system, for instance. there was always options for multiple different identification. And so in that sense, they would not directly force this rule. That is the basis for all of this. What may well happen, and I've all sort of alluded to that, is that some regulations, for instance, for tracking and tracing and provenance, does this product really come from a location where there is, for instance, in food, where they have not actually cut the rainforest for it, or in the case of mining, where they've done that in a very polluted way, or in the case of child labor or slave labor. So I think at some point, those regulations will insist that you have the kind of robust tracking and tracing that is enabled by what I've been presenting. But so indirectly, those regulations would force the hands of the cargo owners to do this. But they would still implement this rule that I mentioned, basically on their own accord. It would not be enforced across the industry all at the same time.
So we have one question. Gilvan is asking how commercial negotiation strategies between logistic providers and retailers influence costs, efficiency, and service level agreements in the last mile cargo distribution.
Yeah, that is a bit of a discussion going on. So if we look at e-commerce, most of the small senders, they use this commercial term, delivery duty paid. At least that's the old name for it, meaning that the receiver gets it at his front door, and that's the price that the sender pays to the usually a courier or parcel service provider. That has a bit of a drawback, because that means that if you would like to use this kind of city hub approach, then this original sender has already paid end to end, more or less. And indirectly, the buyer has paid the seller, so he has already paid for that end to end also. But there is still a cost for using the city hub and that delivery stretch from the city hub to the final receiver. Now, for all the good reasons I mentioned that benefit the receiver, there are still good use cases and business cases for users to, even if this delivery duty paid was used to buy stuff from the seller, to still engage with a city hub and pay that city hub and that and whoever delivers from the city hub as a receiver. But that's for the small ones. If I'm a large shipper, a large cargo owner, I can actually renegotiate with the transport logistics service providers to say, no, I'm giving you a consolidated load with maybe 100 deliveries from my DC to that city hub, and I want a quote only for that. The quote for that would probably be a lot less than the quote for 100 individual ones to a city destination. So that difference is probably going to pay for much more than the cost of the city hub and the city deliveries via the city hub. So cargo owners could, and in my views, should very much consider using these city hub kind of approaches, because they will be able to save significant amounts of money in those last miles. And as I mentioned, that's 50% of all of the cost of the transport and logistics, if they were so clever as to review the way they create the transport contracts with the various carriers to get their deliveries to their final buyers over the short distance. I'm not sure it's complete answer to Sylvain's question, but it's probably getting close to the background of the question. I'm reading.
You can read it.
Yeah, I can read them. Yeah, I'm reading
Okay.
now. To what extent can a smart logistics system influence the implementation of just-in-time arrival as an operational energy efficiency measure? Which stakeholders play the most significant roles in its successful implementation, particularly smart logistics system perspective? Yeah, well, just-in-time arrival is generally associated with maritime transportation, although it doesn't necessarily is not necessarily limited to maritime. But let's focus on maritime. If cargo owners take control over their transportation networks, and they get those more or less real-time feedback from the carriers that they are working with, the cargo owners generally know best of anybody when the cargo should be in the port and available in the port terminal for collection, so that it is available for movement to the hinterland, be it at DC or anywhere else. The cargo owners, I would need to stress, are really the key stakeholders that enable the most optimal way of implementing just-in-time arrival, especially if we're talking about, let's say, bulk transport, where oftentimes the cargo owner may also be the entity that is indirectly or directly controlling the vessel itself. But even if you're sort of thinking about liner contexts, because the cargo owner should be informed by the liner operator more or less in real time based on information and identifiers provided by the cargo owner, that cargo owner is much better informed, much earlier informed, one would hope, to make sure that whatever onward carriage is needed from a port to the next destination will be available in time, so that those containers don't need to sit for a couple of days, maybe even longer than the demurrage period, before they are collected. So that is immediately time saved in the hinterland connection as a result of better information exchange between the cargo owners right from the start, but also when it gets into port, so that the synchronization of carriage onward and main carriage can be done much more effectively, efficiently, and we can actually save some time in the overall end-to-end lead time of that cargo as well. And especially in food, any time lost in that in those few days that are available is also a potential for loss of food and therefore loss of revenue. So again, short answer, cargo owners are the most important players when it comes to making sure that just-in-time arrival either can be done because they control more or less the vessel, or we can make sure that we reap the benefits in the supply chain the most as a result of knowing when a vessel will be arriving with some level of reliability, which currently we don't have that information in a reliable way.
Great. I believe we don't have any more. Let me see this side. No, this was the last one. I believe, thank you for all your questions and contribution. Jaco, once again, thank you for your clarity and for helping us to reflect on how cargo owners can become central players in driving logistic innovation. And thank you all for being with us. See you in the next NTalks session. It's going to be next Wednesday, 18, with Jan Peterson. And he's going to speak about supply chain visibility in the container shipping. So I wait for you Wednesday. Okay, Jaco, again, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to see you again.
The same here. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for being here. And what time is it? Wednesday?
It's the same time.
Same time. I may be joining a little bit late, and I have another conference call. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.